Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to the viewers of the Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. We've been doing reruns and also some things that I've been doing in the community for the last month or so. So this is the first live broadcast in a while. To Code Breaker 299, 2099, Mkulu, greetings. Brother Ugawa, greetings. Stephen McKenzie, Sankofa Rasha Mela, Kumbo, greetings. Sister Robin, the really dedicated sister here. Brother Kamara Winzori, I'm glad to see that your lady is getting better. She's had some rough stuff on these operating tables, but that's one strong sister. Greetings to her too. Sister Shonda Henderson, I want to thank you for the questions that you sent, and it'll help to set an interesting tone for this show. And I encourage other viewers to come up with some questions, not just, just listen, but raise some questions. To Chad Jomo Kenyatta, greetings. I'm glad to get back to this show. And I really want to express my appreciation for the sincere viewership that we've been developing here, and appreciation for your work. A lot of you are doing work in your communities, and it's helping to push our people forward. And so this is inspiring for me to be able to interact with this audience. For the past, 2 weeks ago, my wife and I went on vacation for 2 weeks. and we have a little timeshare in Cabo San Lucas, and we laid out for 2 weeks. And that's been my habit since 1973. For people who have watched this show for a long time, some of you may remember this, but for the most part, people haven't heard this before. And to Stephen McKenzie. So in 1972, I've been organizing then for going on 13 years. And I just started teaching at San Francisco State University as a lecturer, full-time lecturer. And I started walking around our headquarters, the Malcolm X Unity House. My head was tired, my nose was running. I just felt run down. And of course, that's due to nearly 13 years of continuous organizing. And then I was writing the book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X and the Pan African People's Organization, which I chaired, which is a successor to the Congress of Racial Equality, was doing a lot of different work, running food programs that fed over 35,000 plates of food to people and giving away free clothes. We were fighting against police brutality. We're building a school. In fact, by 72, we had launched it. We're doing a lot of different things. And so I felt run down. Greetings to Mr. Black Culture and Hire Hecka, one of our dedicated viewers and commentators. And I encourage you all to raise questions on this. So I didn't know it was wrong. So I went to a holistic doctor who was in Marin, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. So white guy, blonde, everything, was a nice guy. He had worked in the Congo, providing medical relief to the victims of Mobutu. And of course, that was free of charge, and he was risking his life. And so, Lady KX Mosley, I just asked about you. You're one of the strongest people I know. I don't know how many people could go through what you're going through and still come out beautiful and strong. And I know you got a good man right there looking out for you. Because when I did that show on the Twa, one of many, and I was talking about happiness among the Twa was bringing home an antelope and putting a smile on his woman's face. And he said, that's what I do. And I know you all are bonded. So glad to see you, lady. Hope you get a lot better. So, I went to this guy, and I'm telling this for a reason. You'll see in a minute. I went to this guy for a health checkup. It was a holistic health checkup. So he did iridology, which is looking at your eyes, because the vessels in your eyes connect to different organs, and the way in which those vessels look tell you the health of those organs. So he did a holistic health checkup, and then he had a pharmacy in his medical office, and that consisted of vitamins and various nutritional supplements. So he put me on a mega vitamin regimen that I followed ever since. This was 1972. So since my head was tired, then mega vitamins on potassium, which I've always eaten a lot of bananas because I'm, into brain, I need the brain food, but this helped pump me up. Runny nose, that may have been an allergy, but I wasn't sure. It stopped because mega dose of vitamin C, and then a whole lot of other vitamins. So I started taking those. But then I realized I had to introduce balance in my life. At 12 years, I've been now in the movement 63 years. And so I made decisions, one of which was to take vacations. That's part of the reasons for explaining this vacation. So every year I take 2 to 3 weeks off a year, usually going to Africa, sometimes the Caribbean, and occasionally Mexico. But most of my time was in Africa. And I brought so much money to Africa that you could build a nation. And then that following year, I'd gone to Africa on a work team. That was not a vacation. 3 months of working in Ujamaa villages. I lost 15 pounds. We were sleeping on concrete floors and so forth, helping in terms of the best project Africa had for economic and political empowerment. It didn't fail because it was wrong. It was a brainwashed leadership around Nyerere that sabotaged it. That was the main reason. Thanks, Hi Hecker. You like this outfit. I decided to wear this outfit because I'm honoring the Yoruba system, which I'm in a way, the last 50 years. So I just wanted to honor that. And this outfit was made in Nigeria around 1990. And the brother that you see on the promotional for this show, Araba Yemi Ilibubin, is both a Babalawo, which is a priest, which means father of mysteries, and he is also an Araba, which is the second highest office in Ifa among the priesthood. And I'm alive because of him. So he's been my Babalawo for almost 50 years. So usually when I'm talking about stuff, it's stuff that I'm living. And so the Yoruba system, I'm speaking of that today. But I have not been initiated. There are two ways people go into Ifa, the Yoruba system. They may be initiated or they simply, are followers of it and use it. It's a spiritual system. My spirit doesn't want me to be initiated. My priest knows it, so he's never suggested that I be initiated because I draw from a lot of different African systems, but a lot of Africans from America that have been initiated do that, but they've been initiated. I have not. So going back to this health thing, so once I started taking these mega vitamins and stuff, that health got a lot better. And then I started taking vacations. Now, the one in 73 was not a vacation, that was work, but generally a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks off every year. And that helped revive me. And then when we're in the middle of a battle to defeat the Hoover Institute and the California State University system, and they're trying to wipe us out 90 through 92, I'm in Jamaica in 91 for 3 weeks, laying out at a resort owned by Blacks. And I wrote the second chapter of the Mother Principle. Of course, in a vacation, you should vacate. I was writing. Later, I would learn to vacate. That means do nothing. That took me a while to learn that lesson. So I'm saying that to say this. A lot of y'all think I can't afford no vacation. I don't have time for a vacation. You have time for your health. And your health is your wealth. Everybody says that, but most people go about trying to accumulate money and end up broke and don't tend to their health. So health comes first. And so these trips are a part of that. And then I've said this before. People have heard the show a long time ago. I've heard it. Most haven't. I decided to do other things like, socialize more, go out more. Now, with my wife now, she's a born socializer. So the socializing just gets racked up to a higher level. You know what I mean? Get to shake your booty, do this and that. You know what I mean? So that was part of it. And then I didn't like to drive. And then I figured out I like driving sports cars. So I bought me a TR6. And I'm not going to name his name because he's a very tolerant brother. I've never heard criticism of anybody from him. And he criticized me for this sports car. He said, it ain't revolutionary. I said, since when is a car revolutionary? Of course, if I was driving some, $100,000 car, I can hear you making the point. But I said, this car is driving a revolutionary to places, and people like you don't see the value. So I'm taking a revolutionary stand, but I really don't care what you think about this. I am enjoying it. And so I got me a TR6, later a 300ZX, and now I got me a Corvette because that's what I like. I don't care 2 cents what somebody else thinks about it as long as I'm not doing wrong. Because every time I get into that Corvette, and it's pure beauty too, because I have certain requirements. It's got to be pretty, but more important, it's got to be functional. It's got to handle right, turn right. I'm into that. So people can say it ain't revolutionary. Well, and it's used too. I only bought one new car in my life. That's a depreciating. It's not an asset. It's a depreciating thing. You know what I mean? As soon as it comes off the lot, it's lost 10 to 20%. You know what I mean? So, but I had one because I had to have the sense of having a new car. And I found out how dangerous that is to your health later. So I just say that to say you need to take, if you aren't doing it, you need to incorporate into your life balance. You know what I mean? Balance. You hear me? And whatever that balance is for you, work it out because that's going to keep you going longer. Keep a smile on your face. We're talking about you can't afford it. When you get a stroke or a heart attack, can you afford that? Huh? So all I'm saying is you can be a revolutionary and enjoy yourself. In fact, my greatest enjoyment is the battlefield, kicking the system's ass. I think that word ass is appropriate because that's what I'm into. You're into your thing. Whatever your thing is, do that, but to advance your people. But at the same time, enjoy yourself. So that's so much for that. And I'm going to say, I enjoyed myself. I vacated, baby. That means I did nothing. That's a vacation. Most people don't know how to do that. I did nothing and had me some Mexican enchiladas. Man, that's some of the best. Not enchiladas. It's an egg thing, you know, but it's delicious. You know what I mean? So for the last 5 or 6 weeks, we've done some rebroadcast on the Trois, and there was a reason for that. Those are some of the best shows that we've done, along with the Spiritual Blues. Now, Brother Ugawa and I both agree on this. The Spiritual Blues, I think, is the best show I've done, and you should go watch that. And that was not done sitting down. It was, done with the little camera work, a little speech, and there's some background to it. But that's the foundation of our art form. And so, Spiritual Blues was the first thing. I think it's the best. And then a series on the Trois. So there was a reason for that because a lot of people now are coming on to the show. Have not watched these, and because we have done over, I think, 145 or 146 shows, so they don't know which ones to go to. So that's why we put those up in sequence, the shows on the Trois. And as you know, that's my contribution because the Trois, to history, I'm bringing them back into history and coming up with a historical narrative that sees them as the foundation. And that comes through the experience of the beautiful light, where God visited me and gave me the vision for the just society that led me to the Trois, which is where it came from. So you had that. And what was interesting is a lot of new people visited that because, they had not seen this before. And then some of our other viewers, some of you watched it again. And then we also did a rebroadcast of Brother Babazak Kondo on the assassination of Brother Malcolm X. Now, why would we do that? I don't think you're going to find a better interview, a better discussion, which is largely presented by Brother Sakondo. Usually when I have people on, it's a discussion. We did have a discussion. My book, A Political Legacy of Malcolm X, according to him, did inspire his writing of this book. but he is the master on the assassination of Brother Malcolm X. And it's a huge number of views that this has received. And interestingly enough, in the broadcast itself, no critical comments. One came up, I think, when somebody got to hear what the conclusion of it was without watching it. So they even told me that I didn't know what I was talking about and stuff. That was the only time I got a criticism too. But had they watched it, I don't think they'd have been saying that. So those were some of the rebroadcasts that came on. And then you saw a show where we were welcoming to Oaktown, Oakland Black community, a Babalao, an Oba, a brother who was in charge of the cultural arts program in Nigeria and is now a Oba in a city in Nigeria. So that was a very important program because it was a program showing you our welcoming of him. I had an opening address, but if you watched it, you would have figured out that we had set up a cultural exchange program between the group that I chair, Pan-African Peoples Organization, a group called Wajumbe, People with a Message, who had sent me to Nigeria in 1990. And so this brother, who was an Oba, a king of a city, had welcomed us and had, given me a lot of support. And his nephew was ambassador from Nigeria to Ghana. So I was able to network a thing with him where me and my first wife went to Ghana, living in the Nigerian embassy in Ghana while I negotiated a cultural exchange agreement with the government of Ghana, with a brother named Dr. Ben Abdullah, who was then Minister of Culture under Jerry Rawlings' government. So if you think this wasn't important, you need to go back and watch it. Because these cultural exchange agreements and stuff and programs are very important in terms of establishing links between Africans in different parts of the world. So that particular program was featuring that. And then you saw 2 days before my wife and I went on vacation, I was asked to give the keynote address or the commencement address to the graduating class of Black graduates at Contra Costa College, which is close to Richmond, California. That was very special. And Menu Ampin had made the request. Menu's been on this show a couple of times, and he is a master historian. Right now, he's in Kemet leading a study tour, and then he may be in Ethiopia by now. And we've worked together on a lot of things. He's been on our show on doing a number of things. But this was special for a couple of reasons, because the person who has been leading Black studies at Contra Costa College was retiring. Her name is Carolyn Hodge. Carolyn Hodge is one of my best students. She used my rigorous teaching and examination system. Mine is, you either know it or you're finished. And she used it. And when I was beginning to court my current wife and I was getting ready to retire, I got a little lax, because I was traveling to London and doing a little romance and stuff. So at that particular point, I was going kind of easy in class. So then I ended up getting one of Carolyn Hodge's students. And she's been on one of the previous shows and made a comment. And she reminded me of the rigor. And so I had to go back and tighten up. So I'm coming to do this address, the commencement address, And so Carolyn Hodge, my former student, is stepping down as head of Black Studies at Contra Costa. And the person who is taking her place, Nzinga Dugas, who is another one of my best students, is taking her place. So this was special. That's my wife you saw walking by. So this was very, very special for me, you know, that, you know, you see the baton being passed on, you know. So if you watch that presentation, that was a presentation to the hip hop generation. And if you saw the degrees these young people were getting, this is a 2-year college they're going to, a lot of science, a lot of math, a lot of heavy stuff. That was special. But the topic was the hip hop generation, a choice between two cultures, speaking to the reality that they're going to have to choose between a materialistic, individualistic, care nothing for Black people culture and one that is spiritually based and geared towards freedom and is a humanistic culture, their own. So it's their choice, what choice they make. So that's what that was about. I see a person saying, how important are links if the men's minds are corrupt? Since when do you have to be saints to link up with people? And who among us are? But the key point is links are important. And the point is very often the people doing the links are political. You know, they're involved in work, but they're hooking up with people who, as a mass of people, are looking for a way to get out of the trap they're in, which in Africa is neo-colonialism. And here it's semi-colonialism. Got elements of colonialism with someone else messing over us. So you have to have alliances around the world. So you're going to wait until everybody's together before you formulate them? No, nobody does that, you know? So do we really see a move when we're making a move? We really don't, because we're so tied up into victimhood. So yeah, you don't have to wait until everybody's awake. In fact, you won't need it then. And everybody's never going to be awake. So that's been some of the past stuff. One of the things that's very good to see is we've been picking up subscribers at a much faster rate. And Brother Ugawa has explained why, because he's done some hard work on Twitter, Instagram, and getting us into the algorithms. And as a result, the name of the show is going up. More people are getting noticed. But we're still on the slow side because they put us on there. They don't want this message to get out. So if you haven't subscribed, when you come into this show, subscribe right away. And also hit the like button. And also notify other people who are on your Facebook page or YouTube or whoever you know to watch the show. Because what's really interesting with this show is we have a large percentage of subscribers that watch the show on a regular basis. And we're now starting on average to generate 1,000 to 1,500 viewers in a week, combining both Facebook and YouTube. And it took us a long time to get that kind of viewership before, and we'll be doing better. So I want to really say to Brother Ugawa, he has done good work. And the others of you that have been pushing this show have also, been key to this being successful. And it's slow, but it's a dedicated buildup. And then we were fortunate enough to do a show about a month ago where we connected with South Africa, and we generated 800 new subscribers in 1 week. And that's a connection we'll be furthering along with other African connections and other countries. So this is extremely important because this is an intergenerational exchange of knowledge. So I've been exchanging stuff. We've been bringing on younger people. I've been hooking up with other younger people. Sister Dr. Brandy Faulkner, 42 years old, community organizer, and chairs Black Studies at Virginia Tech, and is, a serious sister. We're hooking up on leadership training and leadership organizing. So, and I've been talking to her and getting a lot of good ideas in terms of organizing. So that's also part of what this show is dealing with. Now, the topic for today's show covers a dimension of ancient and traditional African culture not previously examined on this show. I've discussed this a little bit on another show, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but not this way, and not on this show at all. So this show is going to be addressing Yoruba spirituality. Now, I use the term spirituality. There's no such word in any African language. That's what you recognize. It's the Yoruba spirit system. And it is not really a religion, though if you bring on a Babalawo, and I will have one on soon, they'll probably say it's a religion. But their meaning of what that means is very different from what the West means. So in the West, religion comes from the word religio, and that's coming from the Romans, and it means to bind together. To bind together Christianity and what they call, this is an insulting term, paganism, which is their traditional spirit system, to bind those together. That's what religion literally means in the Western sense. And so that would be Catholicism and the way in which they brought the saints in, and they brought in a lot of stuff that they had been practicing and worshiping before Christianity. They brought those in. But religion usually requires these requirements: a written book, a prophet, commandments or rules. And these commandments or rules are usually straight up orders. You must do this, you must do that. These are basic things about religion. So a lot of Africans who are coming out of traditional systems, and the title for this presentation is the Yoruba Spiritual Philosophical Conception of God. So it's going to be dealing with the essence of their spirit system. So many of these Babalawos would say we're religion. Why? Because they're trying to defend themselves against attack from Islam, Judaism, Christianity. Some people, usually not Buddhists, but others who might want to, give Buddhism something that, is deserving of respect, or Hinduism. Most Buddhists do not believe in the idea of God, for example, but they're a spirit system. So African systems are generally negated and put to the side. It's mumbo jumbo. And so they're defending that to get legitimate status. But the fact is, this is a spirit system. And while there are books called the books of Ifa, these are actually oral sayings that are verses that no Babalawo knows all of, that they use in their system. But there's no book for Ifa or the Yoruba system. And there is no book for the Kemetic system. What's called the Book of Coming Forth by Day, those are people passing through the afterlife, making comments or doing whatever. But there was no book in Kemet with divine commandments. The so-called confessions of innocence are not referring to commandments. The 42, those are not commandments, because in spirit systems, you're free to make your choice. And you're not going to find anything that says everything that's said here, you got to believe it. And that is usually how the book works, the book. And you're not finding any prophets in African systems, you know. So they're spirit systems. We use the term spiritual, so you recognize it, but there's no word for spiritual because that's an abstract concept, you know. Spirit is referring to the invisible realm, the energy forces, and so forth. So that is that's the difference. So the topic for today is the Yoruba spiritual philosophical conception of God. And again, in European systems, philosophy is separate from God or spirituality, as they've generally taken spirit out of everything and God out of everything. And when they do have God in, it's usually an intellectualized God put in a book, you know. But the African system, in this case, the Yoruba system, is a spirit system that has a long history to it, and of course, centered on their concept of God. So we'll be dealing with the Yoruba philosophical conception of God because the African philosophy, Dogon, Yoruba, Kemetic, Asante, Igbo, any number of them, they are all spirit systems, whereas the European system is generally despiritualized. God is taken out, and for good reason, because a lot of the stuff that they're saying God said doesn't conform to science. It doesn't conform to a lot of things. So it'd be kind of an embarrassment to put it anywhere other than in the Bible or something. You know what I mean? Like God made the earth in a few days. Oh, really? Or it's got 6,000 years attached to it. Oh, really? There are some things called astrophysics that explode that, but African conceptions of God are perfectly consistent with astrophysics and quantum physics because it's at another level. You hear me? A holistic level. And that's another thing I'll say about the Yoruba and other African systems is that they're based on solid spirit investigation. And it's confirmed in many different ways. So these are higher truths, deeper truths. You know, hear me? Than most other systems have, and all systems have some good things. So I'm not saying they're not good. I'm just simply saying when you get to the African system, you're going to source roots. And the ultimate root of all of this is Twa, which I've covered before. So in previous shows, I've examined the Twa and Dogon, and to some degree, the Kemetic conception of God. So today, while the central focus of today's show is going to be on Yoruba spirit systems, I'll be making comparisons between the Yoruba system and other African systems, two in particular. But basically, this is going to focus on the Yoruba system. Historically, the Yoruba are a people who founded a kingdom that was founded by a person named Oduduwa, Oduduwa. He was the first king of Yoruba land. And of course, because everything is spirit, he was a divine king. And that's true of African kingship in general. The Oba, it's my title, I'm not an Oba, is connected with spirit forces and spirit powers, as was the pharaoh in Kemet and the other traditional heads of African societies. So there was no secular notion that a good part of life was secular, non-spiritual. Secular and sacred were all together, and it was all sacred. And as I pointed out before, great Ghanaian philosopher, his name is Kwame Gyeke, he makes the point that in ancient and traditional Africa, there wasn't a single atheist. I'm not out here knocking atheists right now. I could understand how you could become one if you have the ideas of what God is that people have. You're going to say God's responsible for this, I become one too. I understand, you know. Like Chris Rock said, OJ did it, but I understand, you know. Well, I'm not so sure I understand on that one, you know. But the key point is that the Yoruba build up a civilization which begins in Ile Ife, which constitutes the Ife Empire. So Oduduwa is the founder of this, and this settlement occurs around the 4th century before Christ. Urbanization starts around the 8th to 10th century AD. And the system of rulership among the Yoruba is through Obas, OBA. An Oba is a king. And they can have different levels of kingship of a city or whatever. And then the great Oba, who is the head of the nation. What's different about the Oba, and this affects the discussion on spirituality or the definition of God, and courage to change. Right on, I like that name. And I see you're busy and you're on the move. And go ahead and replay the show. And I like that name, Courage to Change. Right on. Black folks good with names. You always want to be on the good side, so you get the right name if somebody's naming you. You should name yourself, though, you know. So the Oba is to be distinguished from the king in Europe. The king in Europe was a person that could grab power. The king in Europe was often the worst man, cold and cruel, you know. And that was the nature of it, and absolute. For a long period of time, they ran everything, you know, everything. And that's the way corporations operate today, in case you don't get it. And that's the way your political parties generally operate too, you know. You don't have no say-so in that stuff they're doing. Like this war in Ukraine, Biden's wrong in that. You hear me? He's wrong. He should have let them settle. He didn't. That's a whole nother discussion. So the Oba is someone who is generally picked, usually by the wisest elder, male and female, who pick the one with the Oba qualities. The one who doesn't lie, the one that doesn't cheat, the one that doesn't insult men, women, or children, or elders, the one who's brave in war, the one who is the best man in this case, if he's an Oba, you know. And he's held in check by a council. And so it's the council that makes the decisions, not the Oba. Well, these ideas have an effect on the Yoruba conception of God, which I'm going to get into in a minute, because here's the deal. Generally, a people's conception of God is a reflection of their conception of themselves. And a lot of you think this idea of a monotheistic God who just tells you what to do, and it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, turn you into dust just because you disobeyed an order, like looking at something. You know what I mean? That makes no sense. Or God who can be jealous. That's not real. God's not jealous. You know what I mean? So that is usually a reflection of the lives of the people. They can't conceive beyond that. That's why it's the Twa that have the highest and most profound conception of God, because as they said, they were pure people. And so they were closest to God. And so their definition is closest to what God is, along with others who have inherited, such as the Bambara, that God is infinite force, a part of which God distributes to everything that God creates. That is a definition that is perfectly consistent with quantum and astrophysics, that show that energy is the source of everything. And if you understand that energy source is God, then you're going to have a different attitude towards the science that you're putting out there. It's going to be a constructive rather than a destructive science. So this is a distinction coming out of governance systems that influences your conception of the overall governance of the cosmos, that is God. So you can't separate people's social systems, their culture, from the way in which they view God. They can't go beyond usually how they see themselves. So they invest that in God. It does not mean that their definitions are all wrong. It does mean it's colored by culture. And to the extent that the culture is off, then the God concept is going to be off or limited, So the closer you are to this infinite force, the better your understanding of God will be. And the closer a culture is to this infinite force, the better that culture's understanding of God. So one of the things that it's important to understand that when we're looking at the Yoruba conception of God, it's different from the Christian conception, Islamic and Judaic as well, but the Christian conception. And again, because the God concept usually reflects a people's culture, the Christian God concept can't be separated from the emperor of Rome that embraced Christianity, who was not a Christian during the whole period of his life until he was on the verge of his death, Constantine, because he wanted to commit all the sins he could commit during his lifetime. And then, according to the theory, when he became a Christian, he'd be forgiven for his sins. You really believe that? Constantine is probably still burning up in hell, given the dirty things he did, burning his, boiling his wife alive in hot water, killing his favorite son because he was jealous of it, a host of other things. You know what I mean? But the point is that, and it's Constantine that makes the decision at the Council of Nicaea that elevates Jesus from being a prophet to being the Son of God. And he doesn't even understand the first thing about this religion. And so this idea of God being an authority, an arbitrary power, a male killer, in the sense that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity has left the wake of bloodshed all over the planet. And I want to say this. There's a distinction between Black Christianity and white Christianity, particularly the real stuff. I've discussed this before. I'll discuss it a little bit here. And I'm not putting down people's religion. I'm just simply making a comment here that the fact that Christianity is tied to the state, in this case, the emperor, Constantine, has everything to do with how the West then uses Christianity as a system of conquest and control. And of course, the slave trade was very much based on this. So, same with the Hebrews, they were nomadic. And so you're going to have some features of nomadism coming in and patriarchal, all three. And patriarchy just doesn't go along with godly status. You know what I mean? Because it means that women are put in a trampling position, put down under patriarchy. It just don't work, for anything just or good. And I don't believe you can really associate God with patriarchy. So The Yoruba social and political systems grew out of systems of government where Obas were not absolute dictators and were held in check by their councils. So it's not surprising that their conception of God would be a conception where God isn't exercising absolute power, even though God has the power. They're not saying God doesn't. But one of the things that is interesting about Yoruba, Kemetic, Asante, Dogon, all African systems, and this is the thing is Africa shares a cultural unity, is that God delegates. God creates entities that can help God. And notice I'm never going to say him, because God ain't no human being. You know what I mean? So God has entities that God created to be of assistance. And so in the Yoruba conception of creation, which I'm not going into today, I'm going into the conception of God, there are other entities, orishas, O-R-I-S-H-A, orishas, who assist God in creation. They perform various roles in creating the earth and doing other things. So some people who study Yoruba spirit systems therefore describe the Yoruba god, who is called Oludumare, and I'll get into this in a minute, which is spelled Oludumare, Oludumare. So God, who is among the Yoruba called Oludumare, because God has assistants, the way an Oba has councils. Therefore, some of them will call this limited monotheism, meaning there's one God, but because God has assistants, they call it limited monotheism. I call it with a term that I call decentralized monotheism. In other words, African systems of spirit systems all have spirit forces that assist God, and there are those that work against God, but generally assist God. So those are netters in Kemet, N-E-T-E-R-S. And so netters have been defined as principles of nature, like this ring that I wear here, Kepra, the beetle, represents the principle of life, death, and rebirth, transformation. It also represents the union of masculine and feminine, because the beetle is portrayed, even though they knew this wasn't true, this is a myth, but it's all over Africa. You find the same idea that, and I pointed this out before, that the beetle is androgynous, is both masculine and feminine. My name, Tashaka, means beetle. And it meant mother who wasn't married, and so mother and father. And it was an insult because she gave birth to Shaka, the king of the Zulu nation, out of wedlock. So that was looked down on. You know what I mean? That's showing also a cultural unity. Same idea about the beetle, But the key point is here that when we're looking at this concept of God, of limited monotheism or decentralized monotheism, God is supreme. There's no question about it in any African system, but God has assistants. So in the case of the Kemites, a netter plays a role in life, in furthering life. And so the netter Kepra is playing the role of life, death, and rebirth, of transformation. It's the sun at sunrise, coming out of darkness into light. It's symbolic of creativity. That's my netter, you know. So I know something about this. Walimu Baldi, greetings from Guinea-Bissau. Greetings to you and the people of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. They will have Amilcar Cabral's widow, who will be in the Massachusetts area being honored next month. I'm writing a letter to, to be read at that and to state my respect for the role that the women of Guinea-Bissau played in the armed struggle to liberate Guinea-Bissau. So welcome. And Brother Baldy, make sure you subscribe and encourage other people from your country. You can see in the background who I have in the background. That guy with the sunglasses. That's, to me, the greatest leader in the 20th century, Amilcar Cabral. So limited monotheism means God has help in creation. God made that help, meaning God made those forces. And so in the Kemetic system, those are Orishas. In the Dogon system, those are Nomos, Nommo. Those are forces of spirit. So Netter can be a principle, but Netter can also be an ancestral being, either a human that was so good that they got elevated to a high level and became a Netter, or never took on the form of a human being and have always been by the side of God. So this is the concept, and I think this is accurate. See, I don't think people just dream this up. God has forces out there that work with God, created by God. And guess what? You're one of them. The great spiritual teachers all say that at creation, we were there as spirits helping God in constructing this universe. And some of us made the decision to leave God's side and to come to earth. Others had enough sense to say, hell no, I'm staying here. Yusef Rios, what's the title of the book where I refer to Amilcar Cabral? I refer to him in a number of books, one of which is this book here, Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. I refer to him also in my book, The Art of Leadership, Volume 1 and 2, and Volume 1 is still in print. And I also refer to him in Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, because of a lot of things that he appreciated about leadership and about culture and a lot of other things. So this is a big difference in the conception of God, that God doesn't create alone, God has help. Yeah, Yusef Rios, glad to. And if you have any questions, raise them, So this is a difference. Now, I asked Brother Ogawa to ask some of our viewers to raise some questions. And because I know people watch this show and they're getting different things out of it. And so one of our longest viewers and serious viewers is Sister LaShonda Henderson. And she raised a question. She raised 5 questions, but I want to address this one here. And I think this is going to change the discourse and make it more relevant. She raises the question in terms of dealing with Yoruba culture and their spiritual system. This is her commenting question. Shirley Chisholm said in her book, Unbought and Unbossed, that Black Americans have no culture. When we think of Yoruba culture, can we discuss what Black Americans kept from that culture. I doubt that LaShonda Henderson agrees with her on that. I think that she is providing this to raise a question. Michelle Dawson, thanks for your comment, lady. That's my point. Anybody, anybody Black or anybody else, but especially Black folks, but especially young Black folks, and especially because you're the future. But the wise ones of older generations like me and younger and older, good too. But yeah, this is what this show's about. So let me repeat her question here. Shirley Chisholm said in her book, Unbought and Unbossed, that Black Americans have no culture. When we think of Yoruba culture, can we discuss what Black Americans kept from that culture? I'm sure she doesn't buy Shirley Chisholm's statement. Shirley Chisholm was a great person. She wrote this book, Unbought, Unbossed. She was Barbadian by ancestry, and my wife is, and those are some beautiful people. And Unbought, Unbossed, I think that's correct. And she was influenced by the people that she said had no culture. The Black Power, Black Freedom, Pan-Africanist movements, anti-war movements shaped her, because the people of Barbados are called the goody-goody two-feet of the Caribbean. They're law and order people. They're very good people, and they have one of the best governed political systems by Blacks or anybody else on the good planet Earth. So I have nothing but respect for them. But I could say Shirley Chisholm didn't know what she was talking about. But it's a common assumption, and too many of us make the same mistake. Who would say that a dog has no culture, even a mixed breed? Who would say that? Everything has a culture. The only way you don't have a culture is if your people are wiped out. That means you cease to exist. Then your culture is the memories of what you had before. But as long as the people exist, culture persists. Culture is your way of life and designed for living. It's what gets you up in the morning. It's both conscious and unconscious. It's the way you walk. It's the way you talk. It's what you like to eat. You hear me? It's everything about you that makes you unique. And cultures undergo change. And our culture, definitely coming from Africa to here, underwent change. So I thought that LaShonda's questions, and this is the one that I'll focus on here, has real relevance for this show, because it speaks to how do we integrate this thing into our lives now. And that's what she's doing as a younger person, younger than me. She's trying to get me on board with the rest of this. Shirley Chisholm didn't know what she's talking about, but a lot of Blacks also run around talking about, they took our culture in slavery. We have scholars who say that. E. Franklin Fraser, was foremost among them. And we have a whole bunch of others who say that. But as long as the people persist, their culture will persist. They'll undergo change and transformation, as all cultures do. But they'll also hold on to the core of that culture when they face the harshest trials of transformation. So what you should do, if you want to get into this in detail, is read The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, chapter 6, where it's nearly 100 pages, where I go into how the culture was formed and what are the guiding principles of the culture, because that's what this book is about. It's called The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. Those words, a choice between two cultures, comes from God. It comes from the light. It's saying that since 68, forces have hit Black communities, put us in a position of choosing between our culture and a mad Euro-American or European culture because Africans around the world are facing something similar. And so we got to be clear about our culture so we can make the right cultural choices. I'd say read this book, Integration Trap, which I'm pretty sure LaShonda Henderson has read or is reading. So there are key reasons why we were able to persist with our culture in this country. First of all, there's an assumption that Africans were separated from each other when they were brought into this country, and therefore could not one ethnic group communicate with the other. There's a common assumption. And yes, there was some of that. And yes, after first generation, most Africans were not speaking their original language. But what ends up happening is the basic phonic pattern, speech pattern of Niger, Congo, Bantu people, which is the major area in which Africans came from Africa to the US and the Americas, we transformed this into what our scholars call Ebonics. 85% of Black people speak that in this country, the same in the Caribbean and everything else. And it is a language. It follows Niger, Congo, Bantu linguistic rules. And that is key. So like the creators of hip hop, when they come up with this hip, well, that wasn't new. That's been in our culture for a long time. That's a Wolof expression, Wolof. That is the people of Senegal. And that language has a close relationship to Medu Neter. Hip comes from the Wolof expression hippie, Hippi, cat, C-A-T. I got that from Dizzy Gillespie, by the way, which he understood the African basis of this culture, you know? So what does that mean? To see from all sides. The African coming from here could see from all sides. And one of the reasons why the African culture in the US is the popular culture of the world and of the US, and if it is, then how can you not have a culture and your culture is the popular culture of the US and the world? And we're not talking just about music. And quit confusing art forms with culture. The art form is the icing on the cake of a culture. You hear me? Enslaved Africans recreated an African American culture that's based on fundamental African principles and went inside themselves and created an art form. Who in the hell in slavery creates an art form? So they could, as they said, create beauty where there's ugliness. And that's the mantra that we find from both our cultural workers and our artistic workers. And the spiritual blues was the foundation for that. You hear me? Huh? So, the first thing to get straight then is that the African in America, in recreating African culture, drew from certain principles that were like fundamental in African culture, and it became those were central principles in African American culture. And the key thing to understand is that one of the reasons why it would be not as difficult as people think to continue the culture, though in revised form, but the core elements, is because African cultures share a common cultural unity. There's very little that's different in African cultures. There's a common respect for elders in all African cultures. African cultures are spirit-based. All African cultures. African cultures teach through an apprenticeship system. All African cultures. African cultures place a very important emphasis on lineage, clan, and extended family. Lineage and clan couldn't survive an enslavement because most of a family line were not brought over in the same boat or, in the same country. But extended family could, an extended family community where you adopt, play mothers, play fathers, whatever. That was an integrating principle in African American culture. Orality. We gave birth to writing, but most African cultures are oral, and those that are written, like Kemet, favor the oral over the written because there's power in the spoken word. And to the extent that the written word has power, it's based on the truth that it conveys. And generally, the tradition is because of the power of orality in African culture, the oral, then our writers usually write the way they speak. I'm an oral writer. That's what I do. John Henry Clark was an oral writer. You got more power that way. Just like a saxophone player. He takes that saxophone or a trumpet player and reproduces the voice in the instrument. That pervades all parts of the art form. Word up, that ain't new. But the hip hoppers took it to another level. But again, that's new African, just translating it to a new reality, but taking a core principle of African culture and using it. So that's part of how this culture was continued. But this idea that Africans were separated from each other. Well, there's a very important book called Exchanging Country Marks by a brother named Michael Gomez. And my book, The Integration Trap, I draw on his research as well as my own. And this is a key point he makes, that far from separation of Africans from each other being the main practice of enslavers, the main practice was to bring in Africans from specific African ethnic groups because you needed specific economic skills in building up this economy, because these people were too lazy and ill-informed to know how to do it. And so what Gomez does is chart the different areas of Africa that Africans come from. And so he shows, for example, and he's using a table put together by a man named Philip Curtin and David Richardson. So it shows that Senegambia produced 13.5% of the Africans in the United States. Sierra Leone, 16.6%. The Gold Coast, Ghana, places like that, 14.1%. The Bight of Benin, 3%. The Bight of Biafra, 15.6%. And West Central Africa, 25.3%. The point is this: Africans from specific ethnic groups were brought in large numbers to fuel parts of the economy. And so in this particular case, if you look at a place like Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, you have a heavy concentration of Bambara people, for example. Why? Because they were rice cultivators. And so that's a special skill. These whites didn't know how to handle rice. And rice is a crop that we eat regularly. And you should eat brown rice rather than white rice, because white rice has got nothing in it that's nutritionally good for you. So rice is a staple that's an African food that you eat. You understand? Along with a lot of other things that you eat. But the point is, you had Africans from the same ethnic groups coming in, living together, working those economies. So if that's happening, you're going to be transmitting culture that way. You understand? And so this is real key. And so these groups that are being listed here are extremely important. So far from you just being separated from each other, and some of that did happen, you have Africans from specific ethnic groups being concentrated in specific states and in specific regions. The other thing that promoted the continuation of African culture in a new form, because we had to fight to revise it to keep it going, but drawn on the same principles, was the fact that when we're pulling Africans together, the majority of the plantations we're living on, they're large plantations. They're not small. The assumption was they were mostly small. And if they're small, the European's going to have more cultural influence. But when they're large, then it means you could go for days without seeing a white person. And it means that there's going to be a lot of transmission of culture going on that way. So all of these things are extremely important in understanding how culture could be transmitted and reformulated based fundamentally on African principles. So cultural unity, the fact that people from the same group are being brought in together, the fact that these plantations, for the most part, are large, so you can communicate and pass things on without whites always having their ears on everything and eyes on everything. So this was a part of it. Now, central to the continuation of African culture in the U.S., and this is true in the Caribbean and everywhere else, is spirit. Spirit is at the core of the transmission of African culture in the Americas and in the United States. Spirit, that's the core. And it is the key weapon that Africans carried into the plantations against the European. It was a spirit warfare. You could call it a spiritual, but it was a spirit warfare. And it was all the ideas contained in a spirit culture. You're children of God. You're here with a noble purpose and a noble destiny. You're here to accomplish something great. This is what led most Africans, not just in the US, but throughout the Caribbean, South America, to resist enslavement. They resented anybody thinking they could own them. They were not property. But most important, by being put in this chattel position, they were being restricted from doing what is the essence of being a human being is, which is to create. Now, they went on creating anyway. They created a new African culture. They created a new African art form. Africans in the Caribbean didn't do that. Why? They continued the African culture of Africa because they were in the majority. But here, we had to fight to recreate it. And so we had to renew it and put a different face on it. We had to be creative. That's why the ethos of the African American is creativity. Not because we came in here more creative than anybody else. We had to be. That's why we basically like to hear new stuff. You know what I mean? And do new stuff. That's a part of our heritage. So in LaShonda's question, she asked here, when we think of Yoruba culture, can we describe what Black Americans kept from that culture? Not just see here, you don't just talk about Yoruba, you talk about all of them. Because, for example, spirit, that's all of them. And so this is an important thing to really look at, that all of them had this common spirit cultural unity, all of them. They were all spirit-based cultures. And all of them had a system of divination. And they had a priesthood that managed that, all of them. Igbo, Yoruba, Asante, Dogon, I'm sure Kemetic. Next week, I'm going to deal with the concept of destiny in the Yoruba system, compare it to other African concepts. But that was key. So Africans came in with this system and with this belief that they were on a divine mission. This was interrupting their divinity, their purpose as divinities, because they all see themselves as lights of God. And so Du Bois would conclude, Now, I pointed this out before, he was half right and half wrong. He was right in concluding that the most important institution carried from Africa to the U.S. was the institution of the priesthood. He was right about that. And he intuited some things that he didn't have information on that he was right about too. But he was wrong in saying it was the sole surviving institution. Not true at all. You know, I've just listed some of them. I mean, the humanism of Black folks, did you learn this from white people? Huh? I mean, we ain't got no culture. You explain how. We get off the plantation, we ain't got an acre or a mule, and you're still trying to get yours. You call it reparations. Huh? How is it you got this far and no help at all? How was that? Humanism, baby, humanism. Black people care for each other. We still do, not as much as we used to, because the closer, Zordie Hurston said, I've said this before, the closer you get to slavery, the more African we are. See, we think the more messed up we are, like hell. Yeah, we had some mess that comes out of slavery, some scars that come out of slavery. I can list all of them. But the fact is, because of this humanism that we inherit from the Twa and then are passed on from all these cultures, including Europe, Asante, and others, that humanism of caring for each other was a key thing that enabled us to thrive even in the midnight of new slavery, you know, so-called Jim Crow. Our people would look out for each other, you hear me? Share with each other, care for each other. That's an African cultural foundation. That didn't depend on God telling you to do that. You did that because as a human being, that's your responsibility. You hear me? That's your responsibility. Helping each other. Read the great literature that Black people have created in this country. Invisible Man. Read that. And this lady has taken this brother who's passed out. I think it was 125th Street, takes her to her home. She's a stranger, brings him back to health, and then says, I only want one thing from you. And he says, what is that? Do something great for your race. And by the way, contained in that was another concept, race consciousness, which is new. It comes out of dealing with white folks. But it was a race consciousness where you saw we were bound together by our color. And so Blackness, don't put that down. Yeah, you need to tie African entity to it, but don't put that down. I mean, for too long, it was a put down. And coming out of the 60s, what happens? Black is beautiful. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. We still got color issues. Those are the legacies of slavery. But the fact of the matter is, one of the things that enabled us to forge culture here was this bond of unity, which is a peoplehood. We didn't have the land, but we had people. We're a nation within a nation tied together by a common culture. And that nation needs to strive for liberation. And the first way you do that is to free your mind. And everything else is going to follow from that. So Du Bois was correct when he said that the diviner, who was the priest, and in this case could be a Babalawo, a Yoruba priest, or could be a Asante priest, or could be an Igbo priest. It could have been any of a number of ethnic groups, but the Yoruba would be one of them. And he said the diviners were the natural leaders of the people. He said they were the healers of the sick. They were the comforters of the sorrowful. They were the rude and picturesque leaders that the people looked forward to for leadership and direction. He then intuited that they became the leaders of the Black church. He had no proof, but that was intuition based partially on traveling through the rural South and what he saw. I've done the research. There's no doubt about it. Many of the first preachers, because blacks were not Christians during slavery. See, this is another rationale for saying that blacks had no culture of their own. We took on Christianity. St. Clair Drake and people like that make that argument. He says the African in the Caribbean is African, the African in America is Afro-American. By Afro-American, he meant a black person without an African culture. And the fact is that the African in America, during the whole period of enslavement, refused, the overwhelming majority, to embrace Christianity because they saw the devilment that came with it through enslavement, and because they came in with their own spirit system. They also saw the people preaching it were devils. That's what they called them, devils. But blacks make a decision at the end of enslavement to embrace Christianity. It's a 97% decision. And that's basically how blacks in this country have worked. 97% of blacks marry blacks. When blacks stand up, 97% of blacks do it. No other group does that. 97% of blacks supported the Montgomery bus boycott. A whole 96% of blacks supported Barack Obama. That number fell after they realized what he didn't do, that they wanted him to do, but it was still high. 86% of brothers still marry sisters. 92% of sisters still marry brothers. Oh, huh? That's because they like black. That's because even with all this problems that you've got now in social relationships between black men and black women, black men, when it comes to picking a mate, they got to go back to somebody that resembles their mama, even if they're not conscious of what they're doing. You hear that? Huh? Yeah, we know very few are married. Now, that's due to finances, baby. That's due to what they've done to make marriage beyond our reach, due to these low-paying jobs we get and everything else. These are things we have to address. So the point is that when we're looking then at what did we pull from the Yoruba, what did we pull from other Africans, but in this case, we're focusing heavily on the Yoruba, the priesthood was key, and the conception of God that comes out of African culture, that the priesthood was intermediaries for. And the priesthood in Africa, they're the intellectuals of Africa, not just in Kemet, but all over Africa. And they're the intellectuals that see ahead and behind. The intellectuals in the Western world, they're fact people, F-A-C-T. They can deal with facts, but they haven't got too much in terms of prognosis because they've been taken out of the spirit realm. They've been spookified to think that this stuff is something that they can't touch. It's spooknology and all of that kind of stuff. So the diviners were the major leaders on the plantation, and they become, when blacks make the decision to form the black church, many of them are the first preachers, and they're using voodoo to do that. What black people drop into the black church is voodoo. You hear me? And to the extent that the black church is still relevant, it's voodoo. And the blacks who embraced Christianity at this time, they were not into the theory of Christianity. They were into the spirit. And that's why when blacks go and do any kind of recreation in the black church, like the sanctified church, it's all about bringing the spirit back. So if you ask what is most relevant about what the Yoruba bring and other traditional African systems bring, it is spirit. Now, the question is this: how is it that the Yoruba were able to persist in this country? Now, a lot of you don't know that, but they did. And not just in this country, their cultural influences persisted in the Western Hemisphere. They persisted in Cuba, Brazil, Haiti. It's one of a number of African spirit systems, but in Cuba, it is the primary one. And in Brazil, a primary one. One reason is the priesthood could be maintained in those cultures is because they're Catholic. And so in the Catholic systems, you can hide your spirit systems, your Orishas, your Laos, in the case of voodoo, you can hide them under the saints in Catholicism. So this is part of the reason that you'll see Yoruba systems strong in those areas. They could be preserved. It's harder to maintain them under Protestantism. And so you have more the elements of them under Protestantism. But if you look at Louisiana, because it's a Catholic state, originally French and Catholic, therefore you see the continuation of voodoo, which just simply means God. You hear me? So if you're looking at the blues, and when you hear a blues singer saying, I got my mojo working and I'm going to sure make it work on you. Mojo. Or I got a mojo hand. That's something, a spirit power that comes out of your African tradition. Or I'm going to go down to Louisiana and get my mojo hand. You hear me? That's all a part of this African spirit tradition. You hear me? And why was the diviner so important on the plantation? The diviner wasn't just protecting you from a whipping. That's generally what all enslaved Africans said in the slave narrative. The diviner was telling you about your future. The diviner was giving you advice on whether or not an escape plan, a runaway plan, or a revolt would work. That's the part they're not going to tell you because they're talking to whites who are working in the WPA, the Work Projects Administration of President Roosevelt. So they're white. They're not going to be telling them that, but that was what really kept us going. You might ask, why didn't it continue when blacks embraced Christianity? In part, it came under heavy attack. It was treated as divination was treated as, they would say, Satan is a liar and a conjurer too. If you don't watch out, he'll conjure you. Conjuring was treated as a devil thing. So that may have been part of it. But I think the main reason is what happens when blacks are embracing Christianity, they're doing it under circumstances in which they have literally nothing materially. They have no land. They're just beginning to build institutions through African culture. Secret societies were the main way African institutions were built. Businesses, churches, schools, insurance companies. So they saw they were creating a safe space, a place where they could sit and plan things and get away with it. And so I think that as a part of that process, they were moving into a new reality. So the divining piece wasn't as central as time went on. But you'll find that among blacks, going to people to get your future told and stuff like that continued. And some diviners continue to do that kind of work. So that's part of the relevance of the Yoruba system to today, or any African system. Your culture is basically fundamentally African. So the conception of God then with the Yoruba, or the conception of God who is called Olodumare, this is the key question. What do the Dogon mean when they were referring to God? Their conception of God is consistent with what we know on the spirit level. The Lakotas, I've talked about this before, their great holy man, Fool's Crow, who actually through astral traveled to the highest realm of heaven and saw God as a great white light. My experience with the light, I've seen that, and a white light. And many of you, if you're dealing with spirit work, that's often what you're dealing with. When people pass to the other side, sometimes you will see a great white light come as their spirit leaves their body. My sister saw that when my father passed. And you're only going to get that white light if you're going to the right place. And in the case of Fool's Crow, he saw when he went to this highest realm, is the realm of heaven where God resides, which is a great white light. He saw a blue light, which was the light of the sky or heaven. A green light, which is the light of Mother Earth, which is consistent again with the Yoruba idea that God has forces that are helping God. It's not just God doing it all by God's self. So this notion of God is real key. And so when we say the Yoruba conception of God, for the Yoruba to understand that is to understand the meaning of God's name. That is the most important thing. And so in the meaning of God's name, the reason they would place this emphasis on understanding God this way is because for African people and the Yoruba in particular, your name represents your character. It represents the essence of your personality. And so for the Yoruba and most traditional African people, while you'll have a name that will describe your personality, your real name is hidden. And only you or a few people know. And the reason is that if that name is known, then people could use magic on you, in which case they could harm you. So to understand what is the meaning of the Yoruba conception of God or Oludumare, then it's important to understand the meaning of God's name, Oludumare. And so in the Yoruba system, the name Oludumare consists of two words. One, the prefix OL, Olu, O-L-U, but O-L. It originates from the vowel I, derived from Oni, O-N-I, Oni. It means owner of, or lord of, or one who has ownership of. So the Yoruba conception of God is owner of, lord of, or one who has ownership of. Now, the most important part of Oludumare, Odu, is the part of Oludumare's name that is Odu. Odu means superlative greatness in size, quality, and worth. So their definition of God is one, Oni, one who has ownership of. That's the O, and then Odu. One who is superlative, great in size, quality, and worth. So when we put O-L to Odu, Oludu, meaning supreme head, one who possesses the scepter of authority, or who contains the fullness of excellent attributes or qualities, or one who is superlative and perfect in greatness. Now, what is really important about this conception of God isn't what is obvious. They're not stressing because they already know God is all powerful, right? Most of particularly Christianity, this is the great emphasis is on the power of God. And no question, God is all powerful, you know? But what they're placing their greatest emphasis on in defining God is God's character. And this is also, again, an extension of culture, because whether it's electing a leader or looking up to a human being and calling them a good person. Character is the key thing. And so the fact that the most important aspect of the definition of God in the Yoruba system is a superlative character, which means a character without blemish, without fault, a perfect character. But that is a word you could hardly ever use to apply to any human being. Because I don't care how good you are, we've all got faults. But superlative, that is a magnificent way to describe God. I've seen the beautiful light. Some of you may have. It's beauty beyond expression. No beauty can describe the beauty of this light. And I saw just a part of this light. I didn't see what Fool Crow saw, which was the whole light. I didn't see that. I saw a part, and that part is within all of us. Beauty beyond beauty, kindness beyond kindness, love beyond all experiences of love that I've ever had, and I think that any human being has had. Wisdom beyond the wisest, and in the most profound stuff, the most simple. Superlative? Oh, yeah. But there are really no adjectives that describe this. It's beyond that. You hear me? It's beyond that. And it's transformative because it's the potential that's within all of us. So this is an extremely important thing that the Yoruba add to conceptions of God. So the Bombara, infinite force outside of space and outside of time, profound, because it means God's a force and energy. And infinite means has always been and always will be. And this force was here before the cosmos. It's called singularity in quantum physics. Singularity, you know? That period before time, that period before matter, where only God existed. So the superlative qualities are key. And it's telling you the people who have this conception have a very noble conception of a human being, and that the human being is able to be that or try to be that, at least as noble as possible, is they have a God concept that is very high. And so that's another quality that the African carried out of Africa, not just from the Yoruba, into the Americas and into the United States, was this sense of nobility, this sense of pride. That is not what you get from the people who have the broken down attitude that all slavery did was break us down. No, they had this sense of nobility in spite of all the scars they got. And that is a quality that our people still have, not to the same degree, except when you come to profound awakening and stuff, you know. The other part of God's name is Mari, M-A-R-E. So in the Yoruba language, Mari means this: do not go. That does not go, does not move, does not wander, that remains, that continues. Huh? What about that? What does that mean? So this means in part, Oludumare, God, is the one who possesses superlative qualities, but as the one that doesn't go, the one that doesn't move, the one that doesn't wander, that remains and that continues, God is stable, unchanging, constant, permanent, and reliable. So that's part of what this means. And it's a force. God is a great force. And this great force emanates and is in everything that God conceives of. And according to the Dogon, through God's mind. Think about that. See, we're caught into this culture, this white culture that has got everything to do with how species come into being and stuff. And so we've got this idea and a universe that just comes into being, but not who brought it into being. Even with a theory as accurate, I think, as the Big Bang. Who caused that to happen? You understand? That's left out. And of course, if you've got a God who doesn't make too much sense when it comes to a lot of the things that you're being told God could do, make everything in a few minutes and stuff like that, and also do some arbitrary things, some of which aren't good. So you might question that. But this is a science, but it is a spirit science. So if we look at the Dogon, I think we get a better idea even of what this means. In the system of Sodiah, which is in the Pale Fox, which is the highest degree of knowledge in the Dogon system. Now, this is not a book. This is simply oral stuff conveyed and put into writing, because the Dogon are oral. They use a Dunuso table of signs to convey knowledge. In the very opening of the Pale Fox, we have a definition of Ama, which is the Dogon word for God, A-M-M-A. And so God is defined as this. They say, quote, the word Ama means to hold firmly, to embrace strongly, and keep in the same place. To pronounce Ama's name is to preserve all space. The name Ama is preservation and safekeeping for all things. Ama holds life. So this idea of Mari, a God who stays in the same place, doesn't move, doesn't wander. This is the same conception with the Dogon, but the Dogon are explaining that in not moving, God is holding firmly, embracing strongly in the same place. It's telling you, doesn't move. Meaning, God holds life. God is the source of life, the continuation of life, and the transformation of life. And it is also saying for human beings to be consistent in pursuing certain truths and principles is good, even though life has changed, and it's discovery, and it's discovering new truths. So these are some conceptions of God. And these conceptions are basically tied to how we can live as human beings and use this to improve our own lives. Now, LaShonda had also asked for recommendations on some good material on Ifa. I would say the best one is this book, Oludumare, God in Yoruba Belief. Oludumare, God in Yoruba Belief. And I would say that my Babalawo, who I'm going to have on this show at another point, Araba Yemi Ili Buiban, who's written 10 books on Ifa. He has a whole series on Ifa systems, whether it's sacrifice or whether it's on the Orishas or whatever. And I'm going to have him on this show. And I featured him on the promotional for this show. And he's a practicing Babalawo. There were other questions that LaShonda had. We could deal with at another time. So this is at least an opening to the Yoruba spiritual philosophical conception of God, which is the same. Spirituality or the spirit and philosophy. both the same. So it gives us a deeper dimension, not only of God, but of ourselves. So I hope you got something out of this, Hotep. And let's see what we got up here. Lao Tzu. Could these spiritual systems be multi-level and that only through the practices, teaching, and guidance we're able to reach a deeper understanding? Yeah, definitely. There are stages and degrees in all of these systems. And the key thing that I didn't point out about the Yoruba system, one of the reasons that they have had such an enduring impact on African American culture and African Caribbean and South American culture is that they have maintained their initiatory system for initiating and training priests. This is a key thing. And they've been able to do it under circumstances in which a lot of traditional systems have gone under, not just African. So that has been a part of their ability to adapt and survive. For example, Araba Babalao, Yemi Eli Buyaban, he's a traditionalist that never went to Western schools. His English has improved. And some people will say, "Oh, I have trouble hearing him." Yeah, well, look at what we do with our ebonics. You know what I mean? What are you talking about? But he's had, he's polygamous. He's had a number of wives and a huge number of children. And so while he has maintained the tradition of Ifa and has, been an Ifa priest all his life, one daughter he put through medical school in Britain. And each time one of them graduates, you see it up on his Facebook page. And then another daughter he put through law school. And when she got through law school, in Britain, you're wigged out, so you wear these funny looking wigs. And he said, the law. And then a son he put through anthropology. And then he just had a daughter that graduated from one of the leading universities in Georgia, Atlanta, and he was in, Atlanta for a while to attend that graduation. So what does that say? And then he has a son who was interested in the cultural arts and said he was never going to be a priest. And Ifeyemi had read him. He divined him. So he knew that wasn't the case. He's now a Babalao. So one of the reasons that the Yoruba system has been able to survive the rigors of slavery and colonialism and now neocolonialism, economic control of Africa, is they've maintained the system for replicating it. They've also been flexible that while someone like a Babalao who's never gone to a European educational system at all could have children that navigated. And he was able to do that off of the income he earned as a Babalao because he's very good. I told you he kept me alive. That's another story, but I wouldn't be here but for him. So this is a system that's very good. I'm not saying you have to become a Yoruba practitioner in Ifa. And there are many other systems that do the same thing in African systems. But I'm saying that that's one of the things. And in South Carolina, African Americans recreated that system. But there have been continuations of it here. But in the whole, it's been in the Catholic countries or Louisiana where this has been strongest in its purest form. But it permeates the culture, not just Yoruba, but Asante, Dogon, others. The apprenticeship system that John Henry Clark went through, the book I'm writing right now, when I was sharing that with Ifeyemi, my Babalao, he said that's the same system we went through as priest, training as priest. That's intrinsic to the culture, intrinsic. John Henry Clark wouldn't have existed but for that. Masters made him a master, So your culture is permeated with African principles and features. and it's taken on a new African form. DB, the name Ama in Ghana means born on a Saturday for a female. Is there a connection to Dogon meaning? No, it's not tied to that, but it shows the cultural unity in African cultures. You'll find the same words, you know. But going back to Lao Tzu, African spirit systems are all leveled. There are degrees. And in the Dogon system, it's 4. Every system has their levels. And then in traditional times, that covered every area of life. So if you were a blacksmith, then there's an initiation and training for that. You're a priest, if you're a doctor, traditional doctor, there's training for that. Those initiatory systems, and you're going through levels. Initiation in Africa, when you go through that, that means not only are you learning the skills, but you're learning a high moral discipline. And you don't have a priest without initiation because they have to be embodiments of truth. And that requires initiation, work, a lot of internal work. So if there's anything else here. Here's a comment here. Greetings. What do you say to Olamari being female? Even though we say divine force is undifferentiated, there still appears of the hidden female. Well, if you're going to have one, you have the other. So it would be both. But so you could say energies have something to do with that, but God's neither male nor female. But it's interesting in African cultures, particularly those that come right after the hunter-gatherer stage, which when I talked about the birth of democracy and stuff, was using the Igbo as an example, women are raised up very high, and the mother goddess is a very important figure in these cultures. So if you have he, you got she, but it's not either one. Oh, what are you saying, Lao Tzu? In Haiti, where voodoo is prevalent, why is it that the system of divination has been incapable of providing a path of liberation for Africans in Haiti? That was the key to the liberation from slavery. That was, and it wasn't just divination, but it was the whole system of voodoo in which, you know, the power of spirit is key. That is what produced the liberation. And it was not voodoo that held you back, even though you had people like Papa Doc using a negative form of it to, you know, oppress people. But it was a liberating thing. What's happened that has been a problem for Haiti has got nothing to do with voodoo. It's got to do with color systems that come out of slavery, where light-skinned blacks took on the mentality of the French. It's got to do with whether your skin is light or black, elitism that comes in where greed takes over. And so where elites were more concerned about their own well-being than the well-being of the people. And so if you're looking at the condition of Haiti today, these are one of the most free spiritually and mentally people and culturally people on the planet Earth, more so than most parts of Africa. Only people in the history of slavery that destroyed it. Huh? They're held back by a global coalition that put a boycott on them. The French requiring them to pay $1 billion in reparations to prevent a reinvasion. The United States putting a chokehold on the country, invading the country in the 20th century and occupying it. You know, penalizing the people for being free. In fact, that whole reparations was to pay because you beat the French and gained your freedom, which is supposed to be a great achievement, which it is. So it ain't voodoo that's a problem. It's all the people who are